Hello, my name is Carrie. We're going to create some tables in MySQL today. Go ahead and use whatever database that you are making. If you don't have a database, go ahead and create it. I'm going to create items as my first table, and here's why. Notice over here we've got an ER diagram, and we also have a logical design. They're very similar, but the difference is that these show relationships, and the logical design includes the foreign keys and then kind of like points to the foreign key, to the table that the foreign key refers to. So items isn't pointing to anything. Those are the tables that we want to create first. We want to create the tables that don't point to anything. They're independent from the other tables. So our first attribute in the table items, or the entity items, is going to be an item ID. I'm going to use a big integer, because big integer is compatible with this auto increment. Auto increment sounds like it is what it sounds like. You just have to make sure that you use a data type that it's compatible with, and typically any type of integer, you'll be safe there. You just can't do like a decimal or a float or anything like that. It's imperative that some of these entities are not left empty. Think about a form online that you're filling out. You try and hit submit, but they say, hey, please fill out the fields with the red asterisk. These are those fields, the fields that you can't leave empty. The optional fields will not have not null. For example, size is going to be a small integer, and you can leave that blank if you want. Category is special, and here's why. We're going to double check with the database's help that any category that a user tries to type in is going to be in this list. I've got bath, sugar scrubs, I've got salt scrubs, and other, just in case. Now, if a user says, oh, this is a soap, I'm going to put it in category soaps, but we only have like 2 soaps in stock, it doesn't really justify creating another category for soaps. So we just stick it in other. And this decreases user error, which is very important. It increases the efficiency of our database if we have all the rows entered correctly and consistently. We don't always have to declare a primary key, but since we use this auto increment, MySQL expects that this item ID will be our primary key. We forgot to use apothecary after we created it. I'm going to hit up just to do that again. A good habit to get into is as soon as you create a new table, explain that table. Now, here's why. Now I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I don't think variable character of size 10 is sufficient for a name. But instead of deleting this and just creating it again, that's not very efficient, I can just alter that table items. And I'm going to modify the name, and then this is what I completely overhaul. If you don't want it to be blank, don't forget that not null. We can explain items again, and we can see that that's changed now, which is good. Now, take a look at this ER and logical design, or rather the logical design, and think about what table we would make next. Go ahead and pause the video and take a look. Based off of the fact, as I said earlier, that we want to make the tables that are independent of other tables first. So we're going to do users next. Users isn't pointing to anything, which means that users doesn't have any foreign keys, which means that it doesn't need one table to be created before it itself is created. The only reason I use medium integer here instead of big integer like we did for items is so that I can illustrate other types of data types that are compatible with this auto increment. This time I'm going to assert that I use an appropriate size for variable character for the name. 60 characters is kind of long, but who knows? Maybe Apple is going to have so many updates sooner or later that we're going to have a 60-character long password. And again, we need to have a primary key declared that auto increment was used for. And we're going to explain that table, double check everything is good. Does it align with this? Yes, it does. Okay, great. Now, what do we do? Order line or orders? Order line depends on orders. Orders only depends on users. Since we already created users, we can go ahead and create orders next. Now, in terms of convention, notice how all of these tables are plural. The reason for that is merely a conventional reason. Of course, just follow whatever convention your organization or your professor uses, but generally speaking, these are plural. I guess we could do plural order lines, but that sounds kind of awkward, so I just leave it order line. MySQL has a data type date, which just picks whatever date is the current date and spits it out as soon as a new order is created. That also decreases user error, which is pertinent. Alright, and now after our primary key, we have to declare a foreign key. And that's our user ID. As long as this user ID has the same data type as it is in the table users, then we're in the clear. But we still have to tell MySQL what table has that primary key. And if it's a primary key, you'll see the MUL for multiple in this column key. Alright, now that we are thus far, we can finally create order line. I'm going to do something a little bit different here. I'm going to start calling the foreign keys something else. And I'm doing that for practical reasons. I'm doing that because order number and item number are also the primary key for order line. So I don't want to call them order ID and item ID. I want to call them something a little bit different just to differentiate. But they're still the same thing, and I know that because I'm going to use the same data type. I think we used a big integer for item number. You don't want to leave the foreign keys null, as well as you don't want to leave the primary keys null. QTY is for quantity. And selling price, I'm going to use a decimal. Now we have two primary keys, but that's okay. We just go order number and item number. And for our two foreign keys, that we have to separate. What we call it in this table, our foreign key order number, references table orders, and orders calls it order ID. Foreign key item number references table items, and items calls it item ID. We're going to explain order line, and everything looks good. One more thing I want to mention, the reason why we have this order line, and I'm referring to the ER diagram here, the reason why we have this order line is because items and orders would otherwise be a many-to-many relationship. And I don't even know if it's possible to have a many-to-many relationship in an actual physical schema, which is what we're making here, but it's definitely not efficient. So in order to split that many-to-many relationship up into a one-to-many and another one-to-many relationship, we stick in this, what we call an associative entity, and we just call it order line. There are other conventional ways to call it. I've learned order line, and that's why order line exists. It also depends on these two tables. Thank you for joining me today, and please subscribe.